So I've just had my grand piano tuned. That's right, I have a grand piano in this small flat in London. You can't see it, it's just out of shot, but it's very big and it's very real. I cannot stress to you enough how big and real this very real grand piano is. Anyway, the piano tuner was just finishing off, just packing up, and I thought, as a responsible consumer, I probably ought to check his work. So I whipped out my £5 guitar tuner, stuck it on the piano, hit some keys, and it was out of tune. Now before anyone screams, equal temperament at me, no, it was not that, because the whole point of equal temperament is it keeps octaves the same. Each octave is meant to be double the frequency of the one below it. But this was different, this was like slightly stretched, it was slightly more than double. So I did the only thing that I could reasonably do in this scenario. I locked the piano tuner in the bathroom until we figured this out.
Please, I have a wife!
Okay, so if you go back to the late 1930s, it turns out this is much bigger than just one rogue piano tuner. This is a Railsback curve, which is a famous graph showing real-world observations of how real piano tuners were consistently tuning their pianos. Railsback used a device called a STROBOCONN to measure the exact frequencies at which the piano tuners were tuning their pianos. The STROBOCONN was basically the very first electronic tuner, and was also the name of a nightclub on the planet Cybertron. And if you look at the graph, you can see that piano tuners, even back then, were pulling the same trick as my rogue piano tuner today. They were making the bottom flat and the top sharp. The whole thing is out of tune with itself. So clearly in the 30s, piano tuners had some kind of in-joke with each other. They were deliberately tuning pianos out of tune and thought that was really, really funny. But of course, today, piano tuning methods are much more precise. We've got electronic tuners. There's no way that is still happening today. Right? Okay, at this point, there is very clearly a big conspiracy going on by the dark forces at Big Piano Tuner. Because this is the Sanderson Acoustical, which is one of the main electronic tuners used by professional piano tuners today. And it builds this in, like it deliberately does this stretch. It is deliberately making everything out of tune very precisely. So they're pulling this same trick that they were in the 30s, and I don't understand what's going on. Okay, I think we might need to take a few steps back here. Let's work out how you actually tune a piano. In fact, let's go back even further. What is tuning? So we've used the word frequencies a few times in this video already, and as you probably know, a musical note is just a frequency. It's a sound wave that wobbles at a certain number of cycles per second, and that is what defines the pitch, more or less. Except, of course, it is more complicated than that, because for basically any musical instrument and basically anything that makes a sound, you don't just have that fundamental frequency, but you have these things called partials, or overtones, or harmonics, all of which mean slightly different things, but all of which are kind of interchangeable in this context, whereby you don't just have the fundamental frequency, but you have double that frequency, and 3 times that frequency, and 4 times that frequency, and all those different sounds kind of mesh together in our ears to form the tone and the sound of a particular instrument. So this is the phenomenon that piano tuners have always used to tune pianos. Take, for example, a single key on the piano, which you might know has actually 2 or 3 strings inside the piano, which play together, play the same note, to sort of reinforce the tone, reinforce the volume. If those strings are very slightly out of tune with each other, you'll get this kind of wobble, which is what piano tuners describe as beats. And that wobble is basically when the frequency is very slightly out of sync with each other. So it's the piano tuner's job to tune the strings until that wobble more or less goes away, and then you know that the strings are in tune with each other, the frequencies are the same. So if you bring in the partials here, you can use that trick to tune 2 different keys to be in tune with each other. Let's say you've got middle C and the C above it. We know that, at least in theory, an octave is meant to be double the frequency. And we also know that with the partials, each time you press a key, you get the frequency, double it 3 times, 4 times, etc. So if you press middle C, the first partial should be the same as the fundamental frequency of the C above it, if you're still with me. So if you listen carefully for the interaction between that first partial from the middle C and the fundamental of the one above it, and then tune it so the beats go away between those 2 partials, then you get an octave which is in tune with itself. None of this explains why we're ending up with octaves which are out of tune with each other though, because the whole point of this trick is when you eliminate the beats, it means that the octave is perfectly double the frequency. So like, why is this still out of tune?
Just explain it if you let me.
Shut up. Okay. There's one clue that we haven't brought in yet, which might hold the key to all this, and that is stiffness.
Stiffness.
So if you've ever had a look inside a piano, if you've ever stuck your finger in and had a little poke around, you might notice that the strings are pulled really tight, much more so than, say, a guitar or a violin. And that's because in the piano, the strings are hit with a little hammer, so they need to be tight in order to make a good sound when you do that. So this gives piano strings a property which is kind of negligible in other stringed instruments, which is that the strings don't just act as a floppy, flexible string, they also act as a stiff rod. And what that means for the partials is while the flexible string does behave in the way we talked about, where the partials are 2 times the frequency, 3 times and so on, a stiff rod resists that flexing. It tries to keep itself straight. And that resistance means the partials don't behave in quite the way they want to. It pushes them sharp. And that effect gets really extreme the higher the partial you look at. By the time you're up to about the 50th partial, why would you ever look at the 50th partial? But by then it's a good 2 tones sharper than it should be. So it has a really drastic impact on the tuning of those higher partials. So all this means, when you're tuning 2 different keys together, to 2 different partials, to try and eliminate the beats, but the partials are slightly sharp, you end up tuning that key slightly sharp. This whole phenomenon is called inharmonicity, and it's something that a guy called Lord Rayleigh was writing about way back in the 1870s. Which poses the question, if we've known about this for so long, why is it that even in the 1930s, and particularly now, piano tuners are still doing this? Well, it's because it sounds right. And it's really weird to say because we know that the fundamentals of the keys we're tuning are out of tune, but those partials have such a big impact on our perception of the pitch that it only really sounds right if you do this stretch tuning. Pianos that are tuned perfectly with every fundamental of every key tuned exactly where it should be sound a bit flat and characterless, and maybe even slightly out of tune. So we still need to do it. After the STROBOCONN was invented and it was easy to investigate this phenomenon quite carefully, a guy called Harvey Fletcher pulled together a really useful paper which kind of summarizes this whole issue and provides a formula for working out what the actual frequency should be. It varies a bit from piano to piano. One reason that grand pianos are so big, in fact, is because the longer strings reduce this effect slightly. But one thing that the Sanderson Acoutuner does is it can adjust its inharmonicity based on the needs of a particular piano. But the thing is, it's not even just about making the piano sound in tune. Harvey Fletcher, who wrote that paper, actually wrote a paper even earlier in 1928, which talks about the tone of a piano and how actually this inharmonicity isn't just important for tuning, but it's what makes a piano sound like a piano. If you take it away, it removes the whole character of the instrument. It removes that piano sound that we recognise. So, all things being equal, I probably ought to let my piano tuner out of the bathroom. Might let him sweat for a bit first. Thanks for watching. There's a whole pile of stuff I had to cut out of this video about the STROBOCONN and how it came to be, the company behind it. There's just some amazing stuff that I really want to tell you. So there's going to be a future video talking about the STROBOCONN and where that came to be. So if you want to see that, please subscribe and I'll see you then. That's awful.